I was on my third attempt at carrying everything in one trip when she said my name, like she'd been rehearsing it. 9 paper bags, 2 gallons of milk, one 10-pound bag of flour that had migrated to the bottom of a sack that was not rated for a 10-pound bag of flour. A structural engineer who had spent 16 years calculating what concrete and steel could hold, standing in a lobby hallway at 6:47 on a Tuesday evening in late October, wrapping grocery bag handles around both wrists, in a configuration I was fairly certain would not pass any inspection conducted by any reasonable adult who had reached the age of 41 with functional circulation in their hands. My neighbor, Eleanor Marsh, apartment 2A, had given me her list that morning. I had looked at the list. I had noted the 2 gallons of milk. I had then walked 3 blocks of the Whole Foods on Northeast Fremont, purchased everything on the list, plus a sleeve of the lemon cookies she would tell me she did not need, and finished before Thursday, and arrived at the self-checkout with the specific confidence of a man who has not yet had to carry anything. The system failed at the door. I did not look up right away when she said my name. That is the part I come back to, now that I know how everything turned out. I spent approximately 3 seconds. I counted later, because that is the kind of person I am, deciding whether the flour was going to be the bag that broke the arrangement. I adjusted my grip. I moved the milk to my left. I decided I had it. I did not have it. What matters is that in those 3 seconds, I had no idea a woman on the second floor landing had been watching me for considerably longer. She had watched me fight the front door, which sticks on the left side and requires a shoulder-first technique I developed over 2 years of living here. She had watched me pause at the base of the staircase, look up at 2 flights, and make the quiet executive decision to take the elevator instead. A decision that, I was told months later, she found more informative than anything I said in the following 2 weeks. She had been in the building for 4 days. In 4 days, she had not once been the one to bring her mother's groceries home. I did not know she was Eleanor's daughter. I did not know she had come back from Seattle carrying something heavier than any of the 9 bags I was redistributing across my wrists. I did not know that she had been standing in that doorway for a full minute and 30 seconds before she finally said anything, watching a 41-year-old man negotiate with paper sacks and make the specific face of someone who intends to succeed through stubbornness alone. I finally looked up. She was on the landing above the second floor, standing slightly sideways in the doorway, one shoulder in and one shoulder out, in the way I would come to understand was simply how she stood in any threshold she had not yet decided to cross. She said, "You must be Daniel." I said, "1 second." I was still talking to the flour. I do not know what she was expecting in that moment. I know what I was not. I was not expecting the 40-minute wait at the pharmacy, the 3-block walk I would stop making alone, the dinner where the Douglas fir dropped needles outside the window while we stood at the sink and said almost nothing, and it was the most comfortable I had been in years. I was not expecting her at all. I should have looked up sooner. My name is Daniel Reeves. I am 41 years old. I live in apartment 2C of a brick building in the Irvington neighborhood of Portland, Oregon, and I have been there for 6 years, which is long enough that the building manager knows I will fix small things myself and stop sending maintenance for anything under a certain threshold of urgency. I am a structural engineer. Specifically, I work as a senior engineer at a mid-sized firm called Meridian Structural that holds a contract with the Oregon Department of Transportation for bridge inspection and assessment. What this means in practice is that I spend a significant portion of my working life standing on or underneath bridges, looking for the things that are beginning to fail before they finish failing. I write reports. I make recommendations. I occasionally testify before county review boards when a recommendation is not being followed as promptly as the structure in question would prefer. It is precise work. It requires patience and a tolerance for cold. I am good at it. My apartment is a 1-bedroom with a window in the living room that faces the parking lot on the east side of the building. I have a drafting table near that window for personal work, a couch I bought secondhand from a colleague who moved to Denver, and a kitchen that functions well because I cook actual meals 5 nights a week, which is one of those habits that sounds like discipline but is really just the accumulated result of not wanting to eat alone in restaurants. I wake up at 5:40. I make coffee in a French press. I have owned for 9 years because it works, and I do not replace things that work. I am at my desk by 7. I do not own a television. These are not personality statements. They are just the shape my days have taken. I do not think of myself as a lonely person. I have colleagues I like. I have a brother in Boise I call every couple weeks. I have a small number of friends who are the kind of friends you have at 41, which means you see them 4 or 5 times a year, and those 4 or 5 times are genuinely good. The life I live fits me. That is what I would have told you if you had asked me on any Tuesday in early October before any of this happened. I had been carrying Eleanor Marsh's groceries for about 2 years by then. It started because I was coming back from the Whole Foods one afternoon, and she was outside with 2 bags. And the expression a 74-year-old woman adopts when she has decided she is going to manage perfectly well and does not intend to be argued with. I did not argue with her. I just picked up the bags. She said thank you and offered me a lemon cookie. I said yes. It became a Tuesday. I wanted to be precise about why I was the one doing this and not someone else, and not specifically her daughter. I was not performing goodness. I was not filling a void. I liked Eleanor. She was funny in a dry, unhurried way. I associated with people who had spent a long time around books and developed opinions about things without needing to announce them. She called me by my last name for the first 3 months and then switched to Daniel without explanation, which I chose to take as a promotion. I did not ask about her family. She mentioned a daughter in Seattle occasionally, in the same neutral tone people use when they want you to know a situation is fine, while also not being entirely sure it is fine. I did not press. I am not a person who presses. This is connected, I think, to the thing I am less comfortable explaining. About 3 years before this story begins, a woman named Sarah, who I had been with for 4 years, told me that being with me was like standing next to someone who was always about to say something important and never did. She was not unkind about it. She was accurate. We ended the way we had been together, calmly, without a scene, with a level of mutual consideration that I think we were both privately a little sad about, because it meant neither of us had wanted it enough to make it difficult. After that, I stopped expecting certain things. Not because of grief, exactly. More because I had added up the evidence and reached a conclusion. Some people are better at being alongside someone. I was better at being useful. I had made my peace with that distinction. That is the life I was living in the first week of October. Competent, orderly, genuinely fine. Eleanor on Tuesdays. A bridge assessment I had been writing up for 6 weeks. The couch from Denver. The French press. And then at 6:47 on a Tuesday evening, I stood in the lobby with 9 paper bags and 3 seconds of inattention. And something that had been standing sideways in a doorway for 4 days finally said my name. She knocked on my door at 11:23 in the morning on a Wednesday, which I know because I was working from home and had been staring at the same load distribution calculation for 40 minutes when I heard it. I want to describe the moment I opened the door accurately, which means I have to start not with her face, but with what she was doing. She was looking at the door frame, not at me, not through me, not with the vague social focus of someone waiting to be acknowledged. She was looking at the upper left corner of my doorframe with the specific attention of someone who has found something that interests them and is deciding what it means. She had a green thermos in her left hand, held at her side like a tool she had not yet decided to use. There was no steam coming from the lid. She had not taken a sip in at least the last 30 seconds, which meant she had been standing in this hallway looking at this doorframe for longer than she needed to in order to knock. She was wearing a gray jacket that looked like it had been purchased for a specific professional purpose and kept for several years past that purpose through sheer stubbornness. Her hair was pulled back in a way that suggested she had done it quickly, in a car, using one hand, confirmed it in a window reflection, and decided it was fine. She was standing slightly sideways in the doorway. Not because she was uncertain, because she had not yet decided whether she was coming in. She said, "You're the one who does the groceries." It was not a question. It was an identification, the kind you make when you have already gathered the available evidence and arrived at a conclusion before the conversation begins. I said that I was, she introduced herself, Claire Marsh, Eleanor's daughter. She said it without inflection, which told me the relationship was not something she was currently comfortable using as a credential. She asked me 3 questions. First, what day did her mother's prescription usually come in at the pharmacy on 33rd? Second, whether Eleanor had mentioned anything about the building elevator being slow. Third, whether there was a service entrance on the north side or only the main lobby? These were logistical questions. I answered them. The prescription came in on Thursdays, usually by noon. The elevator had been slow since August, and the building manager had been notified twice. There was a service entrance on the north side, but the code changed in September, and I was not certain Eleanor had the new one. She listened the way people listen when they are entering information somewhere they can retrieve it. She did not write anything down. She thanked me. She said she appreciated it. She was already turning when she stopped. She looked back at the upper left corner of my door frame, the same spot she had been examining when I opened the door. She said, "There is a stress crack in your header. Probably just settling. You would want to keep an eye on it." Then she left. She walked down the hallway toward her mother's apartment with the green thermos at her side, and her jacket collar turned up on the left but not the right, which I noticed because I noticed structural asymmetries and also because I stood in my doorway for slightly longer than was necessary, watching her go. I went back inside. I sat down at the drafting table. I looked at the load distribution calculation. I was still holding my coffee. It had gone cold. I had been holding it since before I opened the door, and I had not taken a single sip during the entire conversation, which is not something I could have explained if anyone had asked. No one asked. I got up and looked at the stress crack in the header. She was right. It was probably just settling. The building was 62 years old. The ground shifted. Wood and concrete did what they did over time. A crack like that could sit unchanged for another 20 years without meaning anything. I stood there looking at it for longer than a structural assessment required. I told myself I was being thorough. The pharmacy was 3 blocks north and 1 block east of our building, which meant it was 11 blocks from the Morrison Bridge and 6 blocks from the Whole Foods, the two places I spent most of my professional and domestic life. It was a chain pharmacy. It had the lighting that chain pharmacies have, which is to say it was designed by someone who understood lumens but not mood. Eleanor called me at 2:17 on a Thursday afternoon to tell me her prescription was not ready yet, and they had said to come back after 4. I said I would go pick it up after 4. She said thank you and added that she had already mentioned it to Claire, which she said in the tone she used when she was not sure whether she was being helpful. I arrived at the pharmacy at 4:08. Claire was already there. She was sitting in the second of 4 plastic chairs bolted together in a row against the wall near the consultation window. She had her green thermos. She had her jacket on. She was looking at her phone with the attention of someone who is not actually reading anything but needs somewhere to put their eyes. She looked up when I came in. She said, "She called you too." I said, "She called me first." This was not true. She smiled in a way that suggested she knew it was not true and appreciated it anyway, which is its own kind of courtesy. I sat down in the chair next to her. The chairs were bolted to a shared metal frame so that when one person shifted, everyone in the row shifted slightly. I sat down carefully. The television mounted in the corner was playing a daytime talk show at a volume slightly too low to understand and slightly too high to ignore. A man behind the pharmacy counter was explaining to someone that their insurance had only approved 30 of the 60 pills. The fluorescent light above the consultation window flickered every 43 seconds, which I know because I counted. She held out her green thermos. She said, "I have gas station coffee if you want it." I know that sounds like a threat. It is meant as an offer. I looked at the thermos. I said, "Which gas station?" She said, "The Shell on Fremont." I took it. I drank some. It was the kind of coffee that had been sitting in a pot since early morning, which meant it tasted of the specific commitment to function over experience that I found unexpectedly, that I respected. She watched me drink it. She said, "Most people make a face." I said, "I've had worse." She said, "That is either a low bar or a polite lie." I told her it was neither. She looked at me for a moment in the way people look at you when they are revising an estimate. Then the fluorescent light flickered, and she looked up at it, and I told her it did that every 43 seconds. She checked her watch. She waited. At exactly 43 seconds, it flickered again. She said, "How long have you known that?" And I said, "About 3 minutes." There was a granola bar in my jacket pocket, the kind in that specific orange and brown packaging from the Target House brand, purchased 3 days earlier on a separate errand and forgotten there. I found it when I was looking for my phone. I put it on the armrest between us without saying anything. She looked at it. She ate half. She put the other half back on the armrest. We did not discuss this. We were there for 41 minutes. We talked about the chandelier in the second-floor hallway of our building, the one that flickered when the temperature dropped, which Claire had apparently reported to the building manager and been told was a known issue. I told her it had been a known issue for at least 2 years. She asked how long something could be a known issue before it became a solved issue. I told her in my professional experience the answer ranged from 6 weeks to never. She said, "That tracks." She said it the way people say something when they have had that specific experience in a field entirely unrelated to building maintenance. The pharmacist called Eleanor Marsh. I stood up first without thinking, then realized I had done it and that she had noticed I had done it. I went to the counter. I paid for the prescription. When I turned around, she was holding the other half of the granola bar, which she had taken back from the armrest, and she reached across and put it in the pocket of my jacket without looking at me. I did not say anything. Neither did she. We walked back to the building without discussing who was carrying the prescription bag. She was carrying it. The following Tuesday, she was standing in the lobby at 5:45 with her green thermos and her stubborn gray jacket when I came downstairs with my reusable bags. She said, "Eleanor said I should come learn the routine." I said, "Did she say that? Or did you decide to come and tell me she said that?" She considered this for a moment. She said, "She strongly implied it." I handed her one of the bags. We went to get groceries. The Whole Foods on Northeast Fremont is 3 blocks east and 1 block north. It takes 7 minutes at a normal pace and 6 minutes if you take the slightly longer route along Skidmore instead of Fremont, because the section of sidewalk near the bus stop on Fremont has a heaved section where a tree root has lifted the concrete approximately 2 inches. Not dangerous in good light, but Eleanor had caught her foot on it twice. I explained this. Claire was listening with the quality of attention she had brought to the pharmacy. The attention of someone filing things rather than simply receiving them. She said, "Does she know you take the longer route?" I said I did not think she had noticed. She was quiet for a moment, then she said, "She notices everything." She said it without elaboration, and I did not ask for any. Inside the Whole Foods, we went in the order Eleanor's list required, which was produce first, then the middle aisles, then dairy, which is the reverse of how the store is laid out, but the correct order for packing bags so the heavier items sit at the bottom and distribute evenly. I explained this. Claire looked at me and said nothing, but her expression said something I chose not to examine too carefully. At the tea section, I showed her the specific brand. It was a British import in a blue tin that cost $11 and that Eleanor had been buying since before I knew her. I showed her the paper bag policy, always paper, never plastic, not because of any stated environmental position, but because paper handles were easier on her hands. I showed her the lemon cookies in a sleeve near the back of the bakery section, which were not on the list but belonged on the list. She said, "Is there anything she doesn't like that I should know about?" She asked it about the groceries. I understood she meant something larger. I told her Eleanor did not buy the pre-cut fruit because she believed the flavor deteriorated within 4 hours of cutting, which I could not confirm or deny, but had no reason to argue with. I told her she never bought anything in a single serving size because she considered them an insult. I told her she always bought 1 extra avocado beyond what she thought she needed because she had found the store's ripeness indicators unreliable since approximately 2016. Claire was quiet through all of this. She was looking at the avocados. She picked one up and pressed it gently at the stem end, the way you do when you know how to tell, and put it in the cart. Then she picked up a second one, then a third. Neither of us said anything. At the checkout, I packed the bags the way I always did. She watched once, then took over the second bag and packed it the same way without being told. She had understood the logic from watching it once, which is the kind of thing that is easy to take for granted and which I did not take for granted. On the walk back, she asked how long Eleanor had lived in the building. I said 11 years. She said, "She moved in 2 years after I left for Seattle." She did not say it as an accusation. She said it the way you say something when you have just done the arithmetic on it and the answer has arrived before you were ready. She said it to the sidewalk, not to me, and I treated it accordingly. We took the longer route back. She did not ask why. She already knew. Eleanor invited us both to dinner on a Friday in early November without, as far as I could tell, informing either of us that the other would also be there. I arrived at 6:30 with a bottle of wine I had bought at the shop on Broadway because Eleanor had mentioned once that she found screw-top bottles depressing. Claire arrived at 6:32 with a Dutch oven full of something that smelled like braised short ribs, which meant she had started it before noon, which meant she had been planning this specific dinner for longer than the invitation suggested. Eleanor's apartment tells you things about a person the way a library does. The bookshelves covered 2 full walls of the living room, organized in a system I had never fully decoded but which Eleanor could navigate in complete darkness. There was a small upright piano against the 3rd wall that she told me she no longer played but could not bring herself to move because the room would feel wrong without it. The kitchen was narrow, 2 people side by side, required coordination, and the window above the sink looked out onto the courtyard where the Douglas fir stood, dropping needles onto the empty bench below. We ate at the small table in the living room, the 3 of us, Eleanor at the head, Claire and I on either side. Eleanor had made a salad with a specific combination of fennel and orange and toasted walnuts that she made when she wanted to impress someone and did not want you to know she was trying. She talked about a novel she had been reading, a reissue of something from the 70s that she said trusted the reader to figure things out without being told. She said, the best books know what not to say. She looked at neither of us when she said it. I had come to understand, almost always talking about something other than what she appeared to be talking about. Claire ate with the focused attention of someone who had been living alone and eating takeout and had just remembered what food cooked with actual time feels like. She asked Eleanor real questions about the book, not polite ones, and I watched what happened to Eleanor's face when someone engaged with her seriously, a kind of unclenching, as if she had been holding something carefully for a long time and was now setting it down. After dinner, I cleared the plates, because that is what I always did. And Claire stood up immediately and followed me into the kitchen because she was not the kind of person who sat while someone else worked. We stood side by side at the sink. The kitchen was narrow enough that we had to angle our shoulders and wash the dishes, while Eleanor put on something quiet on her record player in the living room, something instrumental I did not recognize. Through the window, the Douglas fir was just visible in the courtyard light, its branches moving slightly in the November air, dropping needles onto the bench. Claire washed. I dried. Neither of us talked. Eleanor's record played. The warm water ran. There are moments that do not announce themselves as significant, and are anyway. She handed me a pot and said she seems happy. I said she said, she told me last week she goes to bed looking forward to Tuesdays. I did not say anything. She did not say anything else. She handed me the last bowl. I dried it. I put it in the cabinet above the coffee mugs, which is where it went, which I knew because I had put it there before. Claire watched me put the bowl away. She said nothing, but I felt the weight of the specific observation she had just made without making it, and I did not look at her because I did not know what my face was doing. We said goodnight to Eleanor at 9:15. In the hallway, heading toward our respective apartments, Claire said, "Thank you for that." I said, "She cooked." She said, "I know." She said it the way you say a thing when you mean the opposite. I found the problem on a Sunday afternoon in the 3rd week of November. I was not conducting a formal inspection. I am not contracted to inspect residential buildings. But there is a habit that develops after 16 years of looking at structures for a living, which is that when you walk through a space, you also walk through an awareness of it, its age, its materials, the quality of its maintenance, the small signs that accumulate into information before they announce themselves as problems. You do not turn this off. You learn to carry it quietly. The back staircase of our building was original to the 1962 construction. The treads were solid oak over a steel frame, the kind of build that was standard before contractors discovered they could use cheaper materials and add carpet. I had walked that staircase 2 or 3 times a week for 6 years without incident. On this particular Sunday, coming back from the basement recycling bin, I felt the 3rd tread from the bottom give in a way it had not given the week before. Not dramatically, not a lurch, just a slight lateral shift, 1/4 inch at most, that my feet registered before my brain did. I set down the recycling bag. I crouched. I used my phone flashlight to look at the connection between the tread and the stringer, the sideboard carrying the load. The bolts were original. 2 of them had worked loose, probably through years of vibration and ordinary use, in the specific way that metal fasteners loosen when they have been doing a single repetitive job for 60 years. Not dangerous yet. Moving toward dangerous on a timeline I could not precisely calculate, but which was not, in my professional judgment, immediate. I had been there about 12 minutes when I heard footsteps on the stairs above. Claire stopped 3 steps up. She looked down at me, crouched on the 3rd tread from the bottom with my phone, flashlight, and a small notepad I had gone back upstairs to retrieve. She said, "Should I be worried about those stairs?" I said, "Not today." She came the rest of the way down and stood beside me and looked at what I was looking at. She said, "What am I looking at?" I explained it. The tread, the stringer, the bolts, the lateral movement under load, the way something progresses from minor to consequential gradually, and then, when you are not paying attention, all at once. I showed her where to press with her foot to feel the shift. She pressed. She felt it. She said, "How long until it matters?" I said, "That was the question. 6 months, possibly. Maybe longer, depending on load frequency." She asked what the fix was. I told her, new bolts, a proper torque, a reinforcement plate under the tread if the stringer showed compression damage when they pulled it apart. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "You do that for bridges?" I said, "Yes." She said, "You do that for buildings too." She said it the way someone says a thing when they have been thinking about it for some time and have finally found the words, not as flattery, as a recognition, the specific kind that arrives when you have been watching something and have finally understood what you have been watching. I did not answer. There was nothing I could have said that would have added to it. She did not need me to. She looked at the stringer one more time with her own phone flashlight. She said she would call the building manager on Monday. I told her I would send her the exact location and the description of what to ask for. She said that would help. We stood there a moment longer than the conversation required. The basement smelled of old concrete and Portland winter damp. She said, "I'll let you get your recycling." I said, "Right." She went back up the stairs. She tested each tread on the way. Not obviously, just a slight pause on each one, a quiet assessment of what she felt underfoot. I noticed. I did not mention it. I picked up the recycling bag and stood there another moment with no particular reason to. It was Eleanor who brought it out. That is important to understand. I did not engineer the moment. I would not have known how. We had stopped by on a Tuesday evening after the grocery run, both of us, which had become the routine without either of us deciding it had. And Eleanor had made tea, and we were sitting in the living room, Claire on the small sofa and me in the chair near the window. And Eleanor went to the bookshelf to retrieve a novel she had been recommending to Claire. She came back with the novel and also with a photograph taken from somewhere in the shelf, a 4x6 print with no frame. And she set it on the coffee table between us. She said, "I meant to show you this. It was from the building's holiday party in December of the previous year." Eleanor was laughing, fully laughing, head slightly back, both hands wrapped around a paper cup, in the specific way I recognized from having made her laugh on several occasions, which was a private achievement I had never mentioned to anyone because it had felt private. I was standing beside her, holding my own paper cup, looking at whatever had just made her laugh with the expression I apparently have when I find something genuinely funny, which I had never seen on my own face before and which I chose not to examine too closely. The photograph had been taken by someone with no particular eye for composition. It was slightly crooked. Eleanor's elbow was cut off at the left edge. It was the most accurate photograph of either of us I had seen in some time. Claire picked it up. She looked at it for a long moment. Eleanor said, "Margaret from 3B took it. She printed copies for everyone who came." Claire said, "I didn't know about this party." Eleanor said, "It was a Thursday." This was not an answer to what Claire had said. It was a different answer to a different question, which Eleanor had understood Claire to be asking. Claire set the photograph back on the table. She said, "I'm going to use the bathroom." She said it evenly. She stood up evenly. She walked to the bathroom and closed the door behind her quietly. And Eleanor and I sat in the living room with the photograph on the table between us and the fur-dropping needles outside in the dark and the record player not playing anything because Eleanor had not put anything on tonight. Eleanor picked up her tea. She looked at the closed bathroom door for a moment. Then she looked at me. She said, "She's been trying very hard since she got here." I said I knew. She said, "She renewed the remote arrangement twice already." I said nothing. Eleanor drank her tea. She set it down. She said, "She doesn't know what to do with someone who just does the thing without making it mean anything." I thought about that. I said, neither do I. She looked at me with the expression she used when she was not going to say the thing she was thinking. She opened her novel to her page. Claire came back from the bathroom 3 minutes later. Her voice was the same. She sat back down on the sofa and asked Eleanor about the chapter she had left off on. And Eleanor told her, and they talked about the book. And I sat in the chair by the window and drank my tea. The photograph stayed on the coffee table the whole evening. Nobody mentioned it again. On my way out, at the door, Claire paused. She did not look at me. She said, same time Tuesday. It was not a question. I said, same time Tuesday. She nodded. She went inside. I heard Eleanor say something and Claire laugh. Not fully. Not the way Eleanor had laughed in the photograph, but close. Getting closer. About a week before Marcus arrived, Eleanor said something I have been carrying since I had come by on a Wednesday evening to drop off the Thursday prescription. The pharmacy had been texting me as Eleanor's alternate contact for 2 years, a designation I had been set as and had never thought to change. And Eleanor was making tea, and we were talking about nothing in particular, which is the kind of conversation Eleanor was best at because it was where she kept the things she actually meant. She said at some point, without preface, in the way she said the things she meant, she didn't come back for me, not at first. I waited. She said she came back because she ran out of places to go. Her relationship ended in August. She was already working remotely because of a project. And then there was no reason to stay in Seattle and nothing pulling her anywhere else. And I think Portland eventually just had the gravity of something you have been avoiding for long enough. She poured the water into the mugs. She said she told me she came to check on me. I let her keep that. It is a better story than the real one, and it got her here. So I asked if she had told anyone else this. She said, who would I tell? I understood then that Eleanor had been keeping a lot of things with no one to give them to, and that I had, without particularly intending to, become the person she gave them to. Whether that was the kindest thing she could have done for me or simply the most efficient use of an available container, I was not sure it mattered which. I did not learn until later, the night Claire knocked on my door, that she had been standing in the hallway when Eleanor said it. She had been outside the door for 4 minutes before she knocked. She heard everything. She did not knock after hearing it. She went back to her apartment and sat with it alone until Marcus arrived 2 days later and gave her something else to carry. Marcus Webb arrived on a Friday afternoon in the second week of December. I know because I was coming back from the Morrison Bridge assessment and I saw a unfamiliar car in the visitor lot, a dark green Range Rover with the clean exterior of something washed on a professional schedule. I noted this. The way I note things, I am not sure yet are relevant. He was in Eleanor's apartment when I stopped by to drop something off, which I discovered when I knocked, and Claire answered instead of Eleanor. She opened the door wide enough for me to see past her. A man in a charcoal jacket sitting in the good chair near the bookshelf, leather portfolio on his knee, a series of glossy brochures fanned on the coffee table in the space where the photograph had been. Claire's face said, I am glad you are here, and I am not sure why. I came in. His name was Marcus Webb, Eleanor's nephew, her late husband's sister's son, who lived in Lake Oswego and managed commercial real estate. He shook my hand with the handshake of someone who had attended a seminar on handshaking. His jacket was expensive in the way that suggests the impression of expense rather than the fact of it. He had the warmth of a man who had practiced warmth until it no longer required effort. He explained his visit with the fluency of someone who had explained it before, possibly to himself in the car on the way over. He had been concerned. He had been following Eleanor's situation, use that word, situation, from a distance and felt it was time to be more present. He had toured a facility in Lake Oswego that was, by all accounts, exceptional. He had brought materials. The brochures were printed on heavy paper stock, the kind that implies careful consideration. The facility was called Cedarwood. There were photographs of common rooms with sofas, the color of slate, and large windows, and people of Eleanor's approximate age arranged in groupings that suggested community. There was a photograph of a library. Eleanor looked at the photograph of the library and said nothing. Marcus made his case warmly in the direction of Claire and me, while Eleanor sat in her own living room in her blue cardigan with the mismatched button, holding her tea, listening to a detailed proposal for where she should go. He did not ask Eleanor what she thought. He asked Claire what she thought. Eleanor looked at me from across the room. She said nothing. She did not need to. Marcus asked if he could have a few minutes with Claire privately. He said it the way people say things when the decision has already been made and the question is courtesy. I laughed. Eleanor walked me to the door, which she did not normally do, and she handed me a Tupperware container of lentil soup that she also did not normally have ready, which meant she had known Marcus was coming and had prepared a reason to get me to the door so I could leave without appearing to be removed. She said, "He drives a very large car for one person." I said, "He does." She said, "Come Tuesday." I went back to my apartment. I sat at the drafting table. 22 minutes later, I heard Eleanor's front door open and close, then footsteps in the hallway, then quiet. Claire told me what Marcus said later that night. Not everything. Enough. He had made 3 arguments. The first was about Eleanor's age and the natural limits of independent living, which was reasonable. The second was about the building. Structural concerns had apparently been raised. A reference to the staircase report I had sent to the building manager lifted and applied in a direction I had not intended. The third argument was the one that landed. He said, "You cannot be here every day. You are not here every day. And even when you are here, she has a support system you may not fully understand. She has a neighbor who's been stepping in for a long time. You do not want her dependent on a neighbor." He said it warmly. He was not wrong about the logistics, but what he was actually saying was, you have been absent, someone else is present, and that imbalance requires professional intervention. He was making the argument Claire had made to herself for years. She is managing, someone else will cover it. I cannot be everywhere. And now he was using it as evidence of a problem he was offering to solve. She said she recognized the logic. She said it felt like being handed something she had put down and being told it was the cause of everything that followed. He told her the decision did not need to be made right away. He said, just think about what is actually best for her. She said she'd been thinking about nothing else since she got here. He said, I know. That is why I am glad you came. Marcus returned the following Tuesday. I know because it was a grocery Tuesday, and I arrived at Eleanor's apartment to find him already there. Laptop open to a social programming calendar, a man named Greg standing near the kitchen doorway with the compact stillness of someone present at decisions without being the one making them. I set the grocery bags down and stayed near the kitchen because it had not seemed like the right moment to put the milk away, and it still did not. Marcus was working through his case with the polished patience of someone who had anticipated resistance and structured his presentation to absorb it. Eleanor was in her chair. Claire was on the sofa. Marcus talked about isolation research. He cited statistics I could not verify. He was being very reasonable about all of it, which was the hardest thing about Marcus. He was rarely wrong about individual facts, only about what the facts meant. Then he said it. He was talking about Eleanor's daily life, the contentment of it. And he said, she has adapted to the life she has. She does not remember she is lonely. She has gotten used to it. He said it as evidence. He said it as something sad and true that he was bravely willing to name out loud. The room went quiet. I looked at Claire. She was looking at the coffee table. Her jaw had the specific stillness I had come to recognize as the thing that happened when she was processing something she had not been prepared to feel. Because he was not describing only Eleanor. He was describing what happens to a person when someone they love stays away long enough. The loneliness becomes the baseline. The expecting stops. The getting used to it becomes indistinguishable from being fine. He had just described 7 years of Claire's choices in 11 words, and he had meant it as a reason to act, not as an indictment. Eleanor looked at Marcus with the expression she used when she was deciding not to say the thing she was thinking. Marcus continued talking. He took the silence as consideration. I went back to my apartment after Marcus left at 8:45. I put the groceries away. I made a bowl of Eleanor's lentil soup standing at the kitchen counter and looked out the window at the parking lot in the dark. Marcus was not wrong that Eleanor was 74 and living alone. He was not wrong about the limits of independent living or the value of on-site medical support. He was only wrong about what all of it added up to, and I did not know how to say that in terms he was equipped to receive, because it was not a structural argument. It was a different kind entirely. I was washing the soup bowl when she knocked. 10:48. I looked at the clock when I heard it. 3 knocks, not urgent, not hesitant, decided, out of an instinct to record the moment I did not fully understand at the time. I opened the door. She was in a darker jacket than the gray one, heavier. She was carrying the green thermos. Empty. She was standing fully in the doorway, both shoulders even, the way she had started standing in doorways in the past several weeks. She said, "I have been thinking about the broken step." I looked at her. She looked at me. She was not talking about the broken step. I said, "Do you want to come in?" She looked at the upper left corner of the door frame. The stress crack. Probably just settling. She said, "I was outside my mother's door for 4 minutes on Wednesday before I knocked." She did not say which Wednesday. She did not need to. I knew exactly what Eleanor had said that night. I said, "She said it the way she says the thing she loves most about you." Claire was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "I know." She came in. I made coffee. We sat on the Denver couch and talked for a long time about things that had nothing to do with Marcus and everything to do with Marcus. And at some point, the conversation became about something else, which was the conversation we had been not having since October. When she left at 12:31, she said, "I am not going to let him do it." I said, "I know." She said, "I just wanted you to know that I know that." I said, "I know that too." She went back down the hall toward Eleanor's apartment. I stood in my doorway and watched her go. And I thought about what Eleanor had said about the best books, knowing what not to say. And I thought about how I had been living by that principle for a long time and was no longer sure whether it was wisdom or just old habit dressed up to look like one. I closed the door. I did not sleep for some time. The building manager called the meeting on a Thursday morning, which meant it was not my idea and not entirely Marcus's idea either, or at least it had not started as his. The maintenance staff had been in the back staircase the previous week to address the bolt issue I had flagged, and whoever handled the paperwork had mentioned the inspection to the building manager, and the building manager, a man named Phil who had managed the building for 14 years and wore the same canvas jacket in every season, as if he had decided once what the weather required and had not revisited the question, had determined that a meeting was appropriate. It was in the ground floor meeting room, which was the building's way of acknowledging that there was a room on the ground floor with a table in it that nobody used for anything else. Phil was there. Marcus was there with Greg. Eleanor was there in her blue cardigan, hands folded on the table in front of her, in the posture she used when she had decided to listen before she decided anything else. Claire had arrived before me and was standing near the back wall. She was standing in the doorway. I noticed this before I sat down, both shoulders in, fully inside the room, not sideways. I looked at her for one moment and then looked at the table and took the chair nearest the door. Phil ran the meeting the way Phil ran everything, which was thoroughly and without particular grace. He summarized the staircase situation. A structural concern had been identified by a resident, reported, assessed, and remedied, new fasteners, a reinforcement plate on the lower stringer, work completed the previous Friday by the contracted maintenance team. He was prepared to leave it there. He had his folder open to a single page. He was a man ready to close a meeting. Marcus did not let him close it. He said that the staircase issue, while resolved, had raised broader questions that he believed the building owed Eleanor an honest answer about. He spoke about the building's age, 62 years, original infrastructure in several key areas. He spoke about the pattern of deferred maintenance, the chandelier on the second floor, the elevator slowdown that had persisted since August, the staircase that had required resident intervention rather than scheduled inspection. He was building something, and he was building it the way he built everything, which was with real materials arranged in an order that served a conclusion he had reached before gathering them. Greg quietly opened a folder and placed a printed document on the table. A maintenance audit from an unnamed third party. Several pages, tabbed. Marcus said the staircase report had been filed by a resident rather than a contracted professional. He said he was not questioning anyone's intentions. He said the fact that a resident had felt it necessary to informally inspect the building's infrastructure was itself a signal worth examining carefully in the context of a 74-year-old woman living alone. Eleanor looked at me from across the table. Phil was writing something in his folder. Greg's audit was open on the table. Marcus had the specific expression of a man who was saying difficult things and was very comfortable doing it. I was looking at the maintenance audit. I was thinking about a thing that happens in structural assessment, which is that data does not misrepresent itself. Data is what it is, but the sequence in which you present data shapes the conclusion you are invited to reach. And a skilled presenter can lead a room to a finding the data does not actually support by controlling the order carefully. I had seen it in county review hearings. I had written reports specifically designed to prevent it. I had sent the staircase report to Phil so that a maintenance issue would be documented and fixed. It had been documented and fixed. The issue was closed. What Marcus was doing was reopening a closed issue in order to use the act of its closure as evidence of a pattern. I looked at Phil. Phil was still writing. I said, I would like to clarify the staircase report. The room looked at me. I said, I am a licensed structural engineer. I hold a current certification with the Oregon State Board of Examiners for engineering and land surveying. In November, I identified lateral movement in the third tread of the back staircase during routine use. The cause was 2 corroded fasteners in the connection between the tread and the stringer, a maintenance issue standard in scope for a building of this age and construction. I reported it so it could be repaired. It has been repaired. I looked at Marcus. I said, in my professional assessment, there is no structural concern in this building that would affect a resident's ability to live independently. I said it once. I did not add to it. I looked back at Phil, who had stopped writing. The room was quiet. Marcus said, no one is questioning your assessment. I said, then we agree. Phil said he was satisfied the structural matter was resolved and closed. He said he would address the chandelier and the elevator in separate maintenance correspondence. He thanked everyone for coming. He closed his folder and stood up, which was how Phil ended things, without ceremony, but with finality. Greg gathered his papers. Marcus said something to Greg. I did not hear, in a low register, the way men like Marcus speak when they are recalibrating. Eleanor unfolded her hands from the table and put them in the pockets of her cardigan. She looked at me with the expression she used when she was not going to say the thing she was thinking. She said, Tuesday. I said, Tuesday. Phil was already walking her toward the elevator. Phil, underneath the canvas jacket and the 14 years of building management, was a decent man who understood when something called for a small gesture without requiring anyone to name it. Marcus and Greg left through the building's front entrance without stopping. I watched them go the way you watch something when you are confirming it has actually left. I was reaching for my jacket when I understood that Claire was still in the room. She was still in the doorway. She was not standing sideways. I had been watching her stand sideways in doorways since October. One shoulder in, one shoulder not. The posture of someone not yet committed to being in the room. She was not doing that now. She was standing fully in the threshold, both feet on the same side of it, facing the room with the quiet, particular posture of someone who had made a decision some time ago and had finally let her body understand that the decision was made. I picked up my jacket. Neither of us said anything. She turned and walked out first, toward the elevator. I followed. We rode up to the second floor in the building's slow elevator, the one that had been slow since August, the one that nobody had fixed yet. The doors opened. She went toward Eleanor's apartment. I went toward mine. At the turn of the hallway, she stopped. She looked back at me. She did not say anything. I did not say anything. She held my gaze for a moment in the way you hold something you want to be sure the other person has received, and I held it back. And then she turned and went to her mother's door. I walked to my apartment. I put my jacket over the chair by the drafting table. I sat down. Outside the window, the parking lot was gray and wet in the way of Portland December afternoons. Not dramatic, just steady, the kind of weather that had been there all along and would continue to be there and did not require anything of you except that you acknowledge it was happening. I did not open the bridge assessment. I sat for a while with what the day had been, which was not nothing, and which I was not going to explain to myself or to anyone else. I am going to tell you about a yellow coffee mug. It is on the second hook by Eleanor's kitchen window. It has been there since the last week of January, when Claire came back from the Goodwill on Burnside with it in a paper bag and hung it on the hook without ceremony or explanation. The hook had been empty since Eleanor put it there sometime in December. Eleanor did not mention the hook when she installed it, and she did not mention the mug when Claire brought it. And if you asked Eleanor about either of these things, she would tell you she had simply needed more hooks and the timing was coincidental Eleanor does not believe in coincidence. She has told me this directly. The mug is yellow, the particular shade of yellow that something becomes after enough dishwashers that the original color is softened into something better. It is slightly too large for the hook and lists a little to the left. Claire noticed this the first time and straightened it, and it listed again, and she left it after that. It is still listing. It will probably always list. The hook, as far as I can tell, is structurally fine. It is now April. Claire renewed the remote arrangement a fourth time in March, which her manager in Seattle accepted without much discussion, which suggests either that Claire is very good at her job or that the arrangement has become the new baseline, or both. She has not clarified which. I have not asked. We carry the groceries together on Tuesdays. This is the routine now, the same way it was my routine before, and in some ways exactly the same, and in some ways entirely different. The way a thing can remain itself and still become something else depending on who is standing beside you doing it. We still take the longer route along Skidmore. The heaved sidewalk on Fremont has not been repaired. We still buy the third avocado. Eleanor still tells us we bought too many and finishes all three before Thursday. Eleanor watches from her window sometimes when we come back across the parking lot. Not obviously. She is not a woman who does obvious things, but I have seen her there on at least 4 separate Tuesdays, standing at the window above the sink in her blue cardigan, watching. She has the expression of someone whose plan has come together exactly as she intended and who has decided not to draw attention to the fact that she had a plan. I have not mentioned this to her. She has not mentioned it to me. We have an understanding about the things we do not need to say. Marcus called once more in February with what he described as a follow-up. Claire took the call in Eleanor's kitchen. I was in the living room reading one of Eleanor's books, and I heard the conversation last approximately 7 minutes. And Marcus did not call again after that. I do not know exactly what Claire said. I know the tone her voice had at the end of it, and I know what that tone means. And I think Marcus understands it now too. Phil fixed the chandelier in January. The elevator's still slow. Nobody has been complaining about it lately. Here is what I understand now that I did not understand when I was standing in that lobby hallway with 9 paper bags, deciding whether the flower was going to be the thing that finally broke everything. The people who showed up for the ordinary Tuesdays turned out to be the ones still standing when Tuesdays stopped being ordinary. That is not a general principle. It is something I learned from a 10-pound bag of flour, a 41-minute wait in a pharmacy, a cracked stair tread, a dinner where almost nothing was said, and the Douglas fir dropped needles outside the window, a photograph someone had printed and kept on a shelf, and a woman who stood in every doorway sideways until one day she did not. It is specific to this story. I am not sure it applies anywhere else, and I am not sure I want it to. Before I go, I want to ask you 2 things. Think about the person in your life who showed up for the ordinary things, the unremarkable Tuesdays, the small tasks that never became a conversation, the route they took that was 6 minutes instead of 5 because they were paying attention to something you never knew they were paying attention to. Who was that person? Tell me about them in the comments. I read them. I want to know. And if there is someone right now whose ordinary Tuesday you have been too far away to show up for, think about what it would actually take to change that. Not a grand gesture, not a conversation about it, just the Tuesday. If this story meant something to you, please like the video. It costs 3 seconds and it helps more than you know. And subscribe if you want to be here for the next one. I will see you then.